Коллеги, наш следующий гость конференции – это наш старый друг, профессор Смайли. И он недавно получил приглашение стать профессором университета финансового. И буквально 45 минут назад он любезно акцептовал это предложение. So, Stafford, you just accepted invitation to be a professor here. So now I understand that you're almost a professor from the Finance University. You are old friend of Moscow, of the Finance University, and well, we are very interested in what you will say to us about BEPS in the States.
Okay, and you've only given me 20 minutes to say this. Let me start by commenting. Have I got it on? So you can hear me? The discussion we just had looks very different from the US point of view, because of course we tax our citizens on the basis of citizenship, and therefore moving to London does me no good at all, because I still remain fully taxable in the United States, unless and until I'm willing to give up my passport. That brings me to where I want to start talking about BEPS from the US point of view, which is if you pick up the Wall Street Journal any day for the last 3 years, you will not see a mention of BEPS. What you will see quite regularly is screaming about American multinationals inverting, waking up one morning and no longer being US corporations, but rather being Irish corporations, or Dutch corporations, or even UK corporations. And what that reflects is the United States approach, which is to tax the worldwide income of our residents. And what is exercising our administration and our Congress are so-called anti-inversion rules. And this simply has nothing to do with BEPS. Second, we purport to tax the worldwide income of our multinationals, but we don't. Because we also say we don't tax the offshore income of foreign corporations, even if they happen to be entirely owned by US people. So there's a giant hole in our system. And again, if you look at maybe the head of the front page of the business section of the Wall Street Journal instead of the front page of the whole thing, you will see discussions of our CFC rules. We've spent 55 years developing a set of rules we invented in 1962 to figure out when we should tax the offshore income of offshore corporations because they are controlled by American people. And our administration every year in its budget is pushing rules that would, for example, impose a 19% tax on all economic income of American multinationals, no matter who actually earned it. So we are very exercised about the question of, do we really mean we're taxing the worldwide income of our multinationals? Of course, if you want to do that, you have to figure out what is the worldwide income of our multinationals. And we've just spent the last 6 years beating up on the entire rest of the world under FATCA and we have come out, we in this case, meaning our tax administration, has come out with a series of intergovernmental agreements with virtually every country you could want one with, including the Russian Federation, under which their tax administrations are going to find out all the stuff we want to know about our taxpayers. So that is a battle we've pretty much won. The rest of the world is on our side now. We still haven't heard anything about BEPS. Now I pick up the Wall Street Journal, and what I see displayed across the front is the European Commission's effort to collect tax from American multinational companies. From our side of the Atlantic, this is a grossly discriminatory, highly unfair, retroactive attempt to solve the tax problems of the European Union at the expense of the United States Treasury. And so what we have, which does make the front page of the Wall Street Journal quite regularly, is two gigantic elephants facing off against one another. The European Union Commissioner on Antitrust and the United States Assistant Secretary for Tax Policy simply don't agree on what is going on in the European Union on the appropriateness of a remedy which says, Luxembourg, you have been really wicked for 30 years, so we're going to make the United States Treasury pay you a lot of money that you get to keep. This is a very bizarre solution viewed from the point of view of the United States. And still, I have not mentioned BEPS. Now we go to the tax geeks in the United States over at the Treasury Department, and they are working very hard, and they have published a new model United States income tax treaty. And in that, at its time, our current model is 10 years old. And the first thing they have done is look at one of our very favorite provisions, something that we invented, which is limitation on loss provisions. And they have retailored, extended, worked on the LOB, limitation on benefits clauses, so that foreign people will not have as much opportunity to treaty shop against the United States. We've also made all sorts of terrible rules about you don't get deductions if you expatriate, so you see the concern with inversions. We have rules that say we call off all of the treaty if you engage in the bad practice of special tax regimes, or if you do that horrible thing which is change your own laws so that the balance of what we thought we agreed to has changed. Oh, by the way, we've now got a number of treaties with mandatory arbitration, and we've decided we love arbitration, so it's now in our model treaty. And after you get through all of that without mentioning BEPS, you get in the explanation to the model treaty 2 sentences which say, oh yeah, there's this stuff going on in Paris, and we've read their reviews, and we're going to put into our model treaty a statement that is not only aimed at the elimination of double taxation, but also at the elimination of double non-taxation, at the problem of stateless income. So yep, we agree, that's a good thing. We're going to put it right there in our treaty so everyone knows that's what we mean. And oh yeah, they've been bellyaching in Paris about some of the intricate details of the permanent establishment rule, so we'll tinker our permanent establishment rule. And that's it. That is all they say about BEPS in the preamble to the new model treaty. If you want to find a discussion of BEPS, you cannot look at the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. You have to go to the Daily Tax Reporter, which is the daily newspaper for tax geeks like me. And you can't even do it on page 1, because on page 1 they're going to be talking about inversions, they're going to be talking about the European Commission. But if you keep looking, you'll eventually find a couple of blogs about, oh yeah, there's this stuff going on in Paris, the BEPS project. What is it about? I know I'm being provocative. We view that, I shouldn't say we, it is a common view in the United States that the BEPS project is an effort of the big European Union companies to beat up countries, to beat up on the little European Union companies. It had nothing to do with international tax and everything to do with the European Union's inability to come up with a sensible tax system. Or alternately, you'll find many American commentators who say it's really about the BRICS countries, big companies like Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, countries that would dearly love to impose their income taxes on a broader, more comprehensive basis, and are delighted to have the, quote, support of the international community in their efforts to do so. At best, say many US commentators, the US participation in the BEPS project is an unusual example of the United States noticing that the rest of the world exists. Going to Paris to help the rest of the world work towards a sensible system of figuring out who gets to tax what. And that's good. We're nice. We're good people. We've worked really hard in Paris. We've got a lot of people on the ground there. That's the good side of BEPS. A widely held view is that American participation in BEPS is a total and complete disaster, was a mistake. We should never have done it. That all BEPS is doing is providing cover for one country after another to extend its taxation. UK, notably, with its diverted profits tax. One country after another is imposing a tax that they think reflects their interests. And they're doing it on American multinationals who will then have to pay that tax. Only it's not they who pay that tax, it's the United States Treasury. Because our foreign tax credit will pick up those amounts, and the money ends up being paid by the United States Treasury to the Treasury of pick your foreign country. So as I say, there are a lot of people who think that BEPS is a just complete and total disaster. That being true, as I say, we work really hard. We've sent a lot of people. They've spent a lot of time in Paris. And we can go through the 15 action points. A couple of them are totally and completely meaningless. Action 1, the digital economy is important. So what? What more can you say about it? Action 2, it would really be nice if we knew how much tax evasion is going on in the world. If we used our collective worldwide efforts to build the data so we can prove what we all know. This is not controversial. So that's 2 of the action points of no consequence whatsoever. Then there are a bunch that we think are really good because basically they're just saying the world should do what you, the United States, have been doing for years. Action 2, we should be worried about hybrids. Now there's one really interesting thing about Action 2. It doesn't mention check the box. We thought maybe you would all tell us we can't do that anymore because you, the United States, are the major source of the hybridity problem in the universe, which may well be true. But we're also working very hard to solve it. We created this monster and we are working to solve it. And Action 2 is nothing we disagree with. We agree with it in principle. We're perfectly happy with that. CFC rules, we invented them. We have spent 60 years perfecting them. We don't need the OECD to tell us what to do. Action 4, interest deductions. We've had our interest deduction limitations, we call it anti-earnings stripping in Section 163J for years. We do not need someone to tell us how to go about solving the problem of interest stripping. Action 6, treaty shopping. Guess who invented limitation on benefits rules? The interesting thing about LOB is the OECD has stopped and said, oh, by the way, we noticed the US has published a new model treaty, and they've reformulated, extended, improved, perfected their LOB rules. So we better talk to them because we want to make sure we have all those good things in our limitation on benefits rules. So now the whole thing is stopped while the OECD and the US talk about the effect and the point of the new US model treaty rules on the LOB. Transfer pricing, 3 articles, 8 through 10. People from the Treasury are telling every conference they speak at these days, I've seen 3 in the last 10 days in the Daily Tax Reporter, oh yes, the BEPS project has adopted the organic substance of reform United States approach to the questions of transfer pricing. So where they came out, because once again, they came out where we've been for years. This is not particularly controversial to us. Action 12, mandatory disclosure. We love disclosure. We've been beating up on the rest of the world to disclose, and the proposition that Luxembourg will have to own up to all of those anti-tax All of those special purpose deals that they've been making for the last 30 years is music to our ears. We're happy to hear that. Dispute resolution, oh yes, we have come to the table. We believe in mandatory arbitration. What we want is for everyone to adopt our special form of baseball arbitration, last best offer arbitration. So all of these, we're now to Action 14, they're all fine with us. They're basically the world catching up with us. At least that's how we tend to see it. Now, come to the hard stuff. Action 5, patent boxes. Patent boxes are deeply offensive to the United States. If you think about it for 1/10 of a second. We qualify. We have all that great, what we do well is creation of intellectual property. We have all those people in Palo Alto and all of those people in Princeton who are working really hard in creating wonderful, valuable intellectual property. Our problem is not letting the income from that slip offshore. The last thing in the world we want is to introduce a patent box and tax that income at a lower rate. And the problem with patent box regimes abroad is all they mean is people have more incentive, not only to move the intangibles offshore, but to move the people offshore. So all patent box regimes, as blessed by BEPS, will put more and more pressure on all of those people in Palo Alto and Princeton to move to Dublin. So this is not something that we want. PE rules, Action 7. Frankly, we don't care much about PEs. You don't come into the United States through a PE. You don't go out of the United States through a PE. But we don't really mind tinkering at the edges of the PE rules. We're happy if you figure all those stupid civil law problems, commissionaire arrangements that just don't arise under common law concepts where agency is a much better developed. Fine, fix all of that stuff. We're happy with that. But what we really care about is what you haven't done yet. Although I read that our Treasury now thinks OECD is going to do this in the next couple of weeks, which is to step up to the fact, to the question of how do you allocate income among PEs. That is an interesting question. And that is the concern we have, is that the allocation rules, people are trying to use the allocation rules to put more income into other countries, which of course creates more foreign tax credits in the United States. So we're not really at all comfortable with where the PE rules are going. So we have a whole bunch of stuff that we're happy with. We have a couple of things that we are, if you think about it, really unhappy with. What is going to happen whether we like it or not? Country by country reporting. Here, we're perfectly happy with this in principle. In fact, our Treasury Department and our business community have approached country by country reporting primarily as we're going to be doing this. We Treasury want to get the right information. We business only want to do it once. So what we want to do when we have elaborate regulations that have come out is to be the leader. We want to say, how is this going to happen? And so that the rest of the world will almost by default have to follow our example. They want to talk to our Treasury Department computers. We've done a really dumb thing. We've said all of this becomes effective in 2017, when the rest of the world is doing it in 2016. But that's an introductory process that will soon be gone. What we are really worried about is public disclosure of CFC. And the European Union is now saying, we're going to publicly disclose everything we get. And the British are now saying, well, maybe we should publicly disclose everything we really get. That is deeply offensive to the American business community. They see it as a violation of our principles that tax information should be confidential. It should not become public. And even if countries don't legally do it, we're concerned somebody, just one country, will leak to the press all of this highly confidential data. And then we get to the final thing, the multinational instrument. We signed the multinational interest on collecting multinational instrument that resulted from the post-FATCA OECD information gathering efforts. We are not in principle opposed to a multinational instrument in the appropriate place. Unfortunately, at the moment, we have a conservative Republican senator in our Senate who doesn't believe in information. It doesn't believe in telling the government anything. Consequently, we can't ratify any U.S. tax treaty at all. We can't ratify existing proposed treaties. We can't ratify the multinational, multilateral treaty on tax information. Our Treasury is indicating they don't think they want a multinational BEPS treaty. That our preference, now they haven't said this finally, but reading the tea leaves is our preference is we have a very nice network of bilateral treaties with the countries we care about. And we're not at all sure we want to have bilateral treaties with some of the other countries.
Professor Stafford Smiley, your presentation was very interesting for us. I represented the Eurasian Economic Commission and I have only one question. What do you think? Which is the level of implementation in domestic law in European countries and in Russia of rules of BEPS and FATCA? What do you think? Thank you.
What do I think of the implementation of the rules of BEPS and FATCA? The easy one first. The result of FATCA in the United States was a major multinational OECD-based project to implement new rules. I think if you go around the world, I have not done this survey personally, but if you go around the world, everywhere I talk, you hear about how people are implementing similar sets of rules, that the gold plate standard of information gathering in the world at large has simply changed. What you do see is that virtually every tax administration in the world has come to Washington and said to our Treasury Department, we would really like to have an intergovernmental agreement with you because you are willing to give us what you are asking us to give you. And so whatever has gone on in the domestic law of foreign countries, you see their tax administrations eager to sign up to an intergovernmental agreement with the United States. And I suspect you will find, if you look closely, many of them using those intergovernmental agreements with the United States as models to deal with other tax administrations. So I would say in the context of information gathering, the FATCA context, that from what I can see, most of the developed world, most of the developing world are quickly moving to try and implement these principles in their domestic tax legislation, in their treaty policy, by signing up for the Intergovernmental Treaty on Tax Information Exchange, by undergoing the process of peer review that is required if you want to sign up for the Intergovernmental Treaty. So I will say, on my experience, not because I've done my PhD thesis on it, that it's being implemented very quickly. The real questions are how effectively can other countries do it? And I would say editorially, I find it very interesting that the Treasury Department has been willing to negotiate an intergovernment agreement with, for example, the Russian Federation. because anecdotally, many people in the United States would be rather surprised to hear that we thought that the Russian Federation, A, could effectively find this data, and B, would get it right, and C, wouldn't disclose it to people we didn't want it disclosed to. So I think, but that I think is an example of the commitment of the US government to the process, even though we do it in our own inimitable fashion. In terms of the BEPS project, I think the perception of many people in the United States is astonishment that the BEPS project has gotten as far as it has, that it has gotten as much buy-in as it has from as many countries as it has. But I think there is a very deep concern that at the end of the day, from the point of view of American companies, what you are going to have is Britain with its rules, and France with its rules, and Ireland with its rules, and Germany with its rules, and they will not be coordinated, and they will all be out to make money for their governmental budgets by imposing more taxes on American multinationals. And that, I think, is a big fear in the United States. The BEPS project is intellectually fascinating. Everyone has worked on it very hard. Everyone subscribes to the general principle that income should be taxed once, only once, and not more than once. But we are deeply skeptical that that will actually be the result. And when you see, I don't know exactly what you do for the European Commission, but we come back to the European, what we see that is an effort, what many people, I shouldn't say we, I am not the US government, but what many people see that is as the European Union trying to force Luxembourg and Ireland to tax income at the same level that Germany and France do, which may or may not be a good policy thing for the European Union to want to do, but to do it in a way that then makes the United States pay those taxes is deeply offensive to us. And it is widely viewed in the United States as a discriminatory, anti-American initiative of the European Union that is going to draw real opposition in the United States.
You, Professor Smiley. Myself, I'm Alexander Zakharov from Prague. I'm Alexander Zakharov from Prague Advice Group. I have two questions to address to you. Do you happen to know the main reasons why the United States withdraw or entering FATCA agreement with Russia? It is the first issue. And another one is, do you believe that that fact that the United States withdrew entering with Russia into this FATCA agreement will affect the exchange of information with Russia and the world leading countries?
I am sad to admit you're telling me something I did not know, which is the last time I looked into the question, we were talking with the Russian Federation about a FATCA intergovernmental agreement. If we are not, I have only just learned that, so I will not try to comment on why it has happened.
As far as all we know, in the year 2014, all the process was ceased.
It is not, I'm not aware of our having said we weren't going to do it. It may in fact have drawn to a close. And I can't comment, I do not know from publicly available data why we might have done that. Will it as a practical matter make much difference? My guess is probably not. I do not think that there are that many American taxpayers, either individual or corporate, who are hiding income in the Russian Federation. So that it may be that as a practical matter, it would not make a big difference. But it has been our Treasury's attempt to say, we do think these are good agreements, We will do them bilaterally with countries that we think have appropriate safeguards in their internal tax administration to make sure that the gathering and exchange of the data do not result in inappropriate results. One of the major ones being inappropriate disclosure. All of those may well explain why the process with the Russian Federation may not be going as fast as the process with other countries has gone. But on the other hand, we have actually succeeded in getting an intergovernmental agreement and a tax information exchange treaty with Brazil, with whom we have tried for 40 years to negotiate a tax treaty without success. So Brazil is sort of the other end of the spectrum, of the example where in this new world, in a cooperative context with the world at large, we have been able to address the issue of tax information collecting and exchange, even with countries where our differences of opinion on substantive tax matters have been so great that we try. Every few years, business people come into Treasury and say, please, please, get us a treaty with Brazil. And Treasury trots down to Sao Paulo and they talk for 2 or 3 years, and then the whole thing collapses.
Thank you very much. And another issue, and one additional question. Do you believe somebody, well, maybe OECD could compel the United States just to follow all these BEPS recommendations?
No.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Kangimo University. The question is on CFC rules, of course.
Yeah.
You mentioned, Stafford, that United States do not care what is going on in BEPS, including Action 3 on CFC, because United States have their own concept on how to develop BEPS, on how to develop CFC. So could you please highlight the main ideas or directions, how your Treasury Department is trying to reform CFC?
Yes. What are we doing about our CFC rules? First of all, I'm being bombastic. I don't mean that we don't care about what BEPS says about CFC rules. I'm simply saying we have our own, we're comfortable with them, we're willing to talk about the details. It's just not a high visibility issue for us because we're reasonably comfortable with our own CFC rules and how they apply. An observation, CFC rules serve a completely different purpose in territorial tax systems like the rest of the world, as opposed to a worldwide system like the United States. So that while we all can talk about CFC rules, while our rules have been copied widely in the rest of the world, you have to be careful because the way they operate is different in the territorial system than the way they operate in the worldwide system. But coming back to the US rules and their actual question, what we really care about is income from intangibles. Our CFC rules originate in an era when the United States actually manufactured and sold products abroad. And so we cared about that. And we have a lot of very talented Americans going to other countries and performing services, and we cared about that. And of course, both of those are still true, and we still care about those, but we have rules, and we spent 45, 50 years, I can count, developing those. What we are really concerned about, since our CFC rules proceed from the idea, we accept you CFC are a foreign corporation. We accept the general proposition that we're not going to tax the foreign income of a foreign corporation. But starting in 1962, we began to articulate limits on that. And the one we are really struggling with is how can we develop a concept of intangible income not US source. US source is easy. But the concept of income from the exploitation of intangibles that we are willing to say should be taxed today in the US under the CFC rules, and not 70 years from now when the Irish sub, in its inimitable wisdom, decides to distribute those profits back to the United States as dividends. So the whole, I would say in a word, that our whole effort in the area of CFC rules is to articulate a definition of bad subpart F income that reaches somebody's conception of what income from the exploitation of intangibles should not be allowed to be deferred. And that is a very difficult question, and we are working very hard on it. And we tweak our rules, and you know, in all candor, the BEPS project was looking at that. This is not a secret. But I would say that's where, from a domestic U.S. standpoint, the focus is what to do about intangibles income that is sitting in bank accounts in